In the heart of an eerie, dense forest, where the sun struggles to break through the thick canopy of trees, a young child finds themselves lost, alone, and helpless. With no one to guide them, they wander deeper into the unknown, every crackling sound and rustling leaf sending shivers down their spine. The forest seems to close in, as if it's alive, watching, waiting. But just as fear begins to overtake them, something extraordinary happens. An unexpected protector emerges from the shadows. A lone wolf, whose eyes gleam with a sense of purpose, steps into the clearing. It doesn't growl or snarl. Instead, it quietly observes the child, sensing their fear and perhaps their vulnerability. The child, too terrified to move, watches in awe as the creature silently approaches. But this is no ordinary wolf. It doesn't attack, it doesn't flee. Instead, it stands guard, its fierce yet gentle gaze never leaving the child. What happens next is beyond belief. This isn't a story about survival in the wild. This is a story about an unspoken bond between the wild and the innocent. A bond that defies everything we thought we knew about nature. You may have heard of animals protecting humans before, but this wolf will leave you speechless. The forest, once a place of terror, now becomes a strange sanctuary for a lost child, and the question remains: why would a wolf risk everything to protect someone it's never known? Stay with us as we unravel this haunting and heartwarming tale, where the line between predator and protector is blurred, and the unlikeliest of heroes emerges from the shadows. Will the child survive this ordeal, or will the forest swallow them whole? In a world where survival is everything, this lone wolf is about to rewrite the rules. The forest was alive, but not in the way the child expected. It wasn't the bright, inviting place from their storybooks. No, this forest was dark, oppressive, and unwelcoming. The trees, tall and twisted, stood like silent sentinels, their branches tangled like fingers reaching out to trap anyone foolish enough to venture too far in. Every step the child took, the ground seemed to swallow their feet, the thick underbrush snagging at their shoes, urging them to turn back. But there was no turning back now. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something far more unsettling, the faint odor of something wild. Every rustle of leaves felt too loud, as though the forest was watching, waiting for something to happen. The sun was a mere sliver in the sky, blocked by the thick canopy above. The child could barely see their own hand in front of them, their small breaths quick and shallow, heart racing in their chest. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. And then nothing. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. The child's mind raced as they tried to recall how they got here. Panic set in. The path was nowhere to be seen. The familiar landscape they once knew had long since disappeared, replaced by a labyrinth of shadows and towering trees. What if I never find my way out? The child thought, their eyes darting to every shadow, every movement in the corner of their vision. Their hands shook as they wiped away a tear. Was anyone even looking for them? Would anyone even hear their cry for help? The air grew colder, and the child wrapped their arms around themselves. But it did little to stave off the deep sense of dread. It was as though the forest itself had a pulse, an eerie, rhythmic thump that beat in sync with their own frightened heart. Then, out of the corner of their eye, a shadow moved. It wasn't a bird or a falling leaf. Something or someone was watching. And in that moment, the child knew they weren't alone anymore. Lena was only 8 years old, but she had already seen more of the world than any child should. The daughter of a single mother, Lena had grown up in a quiet town, surrounded by more books than friends. Her mother, Sarah, was a nurse who worked long, exhausting shifts at the local hospital, leaving Lena to entertain herself while her mother provided for them both. It wasn't an unhappy life. Lena had her books, her imagination, and an unwavering love for the outdoors. Her mother often said Lena had a wild spirit, one that longed to explore the world beyond the confines of their small, simple home. That wild spirit had led Lena to the forest. It wasn't supposed to be an adventure, not really. It had started as a simple trip to collect some wildflowers, something Lena loved to do during the spring. She had wandered too far, lured by the sight of a rare bloom that beckoned her from deeper within the woods. What had seemed like a harmless detour soon turned into a nightmare when she realized how lost she was. The forest, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like an uncharted maze, every tree looking the same and every path leading to more confusion. Lena had always been independent, a trait she inherited from her mother. Sarah was a woman who had to fight for everything: her career, her home, her survival. She had raised Lena to be strong, to never show fear, to always keep moving forward no matter the obstacle. But out here, in the heart of the forest, Lena felt powerless. Her small, trembling hands couldn't steady her breath, and the bravery she had once prided herself on seemed to evaporate into the cold air. She wasn't used to being afraid, not in a way that paralyzed her. But that was before she met him, the lone wolf. At first, Lena didn't know what to think. She had heard stories of wolves, of their fierce and untamed nature, of their cunning ways and how they were to be feared. But when she saw him, the way he moved so silently, so deliberately through the underbrush, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity she hadn't expected. Fear didn't consume her. Instead, a strange calm washed over her. It was as if something deep within her, some ancient instinct, told her that this wolf wasn't here to harm her. He was tall and lean, with fur that shimmered silver in the fading light. His eyes, a piercing amber, glinted with a knowing intelligence that unsettled Lena, but in a way that didn't feel threatening. The wolf's presence, so raw and untamed, seemed to harmonize with the wildness inside her. His gaze never wavered, and though she couldn't understand how, she knew he was sizing her up. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, the same kind of silent calculation that came before the storm. Yet, instead of running, Lena stood still, mesmerized. The wolf didn't make a sound, his steps barely noticeable on the forest floor as he crept closer. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from something else, something unfamiliar and undeniable. She knew he could attack at any moment. He was a creature of instinct, of survival. But there was something in the way he moved that suggested he wasn't hunting her. She had no reason to think otherwise, but in the depths of her heart, Lena knew she wasn't just lost anymore. She was being watched. Why was he here? In the silence, Lena's voice trembled as she whispered aloud, unsure if she was asking herself or the wolf. "What do you want?" For a long moment, the wolf remained perfectly still, his gaze never leaving hers. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his head and began to move deeper into the forest, pausing just long enough to look back at Lena, as if expecting her to follow. Lena hesitated. The fear that had gripped her heart moments before began to fade. She felt something pull at her, a sense of trust, of something guiding her. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the quiet assurance that the wolf had given her. Whatever it was, it told her to follow. So she did. As they walked side by side through the dense woods, Lena could feel the wolf's steady presence beside her, like a shadow in the night. He moved with a purpose, every step calculated, as though he knew the exact path to take to keep them both safe. Lena, though confused, felt something stir inside her. A sense of connection, of being part of something bigger. She had always been told to be strong, to never show weakness. But here, with the wolf at her side, she felt an overwhelming sense of protection, of being cared for in a way she had never known. She had always been alone, but now, she wasn't. The wolf's behavior was strange. He never growled or snarled, never showed any signs of aggression. Instead, he kept a cautious distance, but there was a strange awareness in his movements. He was protecting her, guiding her without words. It was as if he understood her loneliness, her fear, and was offering a silent promise to keep her safe. Lena's fear slowly transformed into something else: curiosity. She wanted to know more about this mysterious creature, this wild protector who had appeared out of nowhere. Who was he? Why was he here? And more importantly, why had he chosen her? The wolf, for all his wild nature, was a mystery. And Lena, in that moment, couldn't help but feel that the forest held secrets far beyond what she could ever imagine. Secrets that, perhaps, the wolf could unlock. Lena had always been an independent child, her life filled with books, stories, and the quiet solitude of her small town. The forest had been her sanctuary, a place where she could disappear into the wilderness and forget about everything. But now it was no longer a place of comfort. It had become a labyrinth, a confusing maze of trees and shadows, each one darker than the last. The further she followed the wolf, the more disoriented she became. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the forest was now wrapped in an eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath the wolf's paws and her own tentative steps. The deeper they ventured, the more Lena realized how much she was depending on the wolf. Every time she stumbled, he would pause, turn back, and wait for her to catch up. His gaze was calm, almost encouraging, as if he were telling her that everything would be okay. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The forest had grown too quiet, too still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She had expected to find her way back home, but the further they went, the less she recognized. The wolf's behavior began to change. At first, he had seemed content to lead her, but now he was more watchful, his senses sharper. He would occasionally stop and sniff the air, his ears pricked, his eyes scanning the darkness. Lena had always known wolves to be solitary creatures, their instincts guiding them, but this felt different. The wolf wasn't just walking with her, he was protecting her from something. And Lena wasn't sure what. As the night grew colder, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees in a manner that felt almost unnatural. Lena pulled her jacket tighter around herself, the chill seeping into her bones. She could feel her heart beating faster now, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. The further they went, the more it seemed like they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to flicker, every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. She glanced at the wolf, whose amber eyes were fixed ahead, his body tense. Then he did something she had not expected. He stopped and growled low in his throat. Lena froze, her eyes widening with fear. "What is it?" she whispered, but the wolf didn't respond. Instead, he backed away slightly, keeping his eyes trained on the path ahead. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the area. There, just at the edge of the clearing, a figure stood motionless. It wasn't human. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she squinted through the darkness. The creature was tall, its skin pale and almost translucent, its body unnaturally elongated. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless surface where a face should have been. And yet, it stared directly at her. The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening as the creature stepped forward, its movements unervingly slow, almost deliberate. The wolf's growl intensified, but he didn't move. He seemed rooted to the spot, unwilling to let the creature approach Lena. Lena's mind raced, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. What was this thing? Why was it here? And why was the wolf acting like this? She had never seen anything like it, and the terror creeping through her veins was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The creature took another step forward, and Lena instinctively took a step back. The wolf's growl became a snarl as he bared his teeth, his body coiled, ready to strike. "What do you want?" Lena's voice shook, but she couldn't stop herself from speaking. Her fear had transformed into something else, something that burned in her chest, urging her to fight, to demand answers. The creature didn't speak, but it tilted its head, as though it were studying her. The air around them seemed to hum, thick with tension. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out all other sounds. She looked at the wolf, who remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving the creature. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. And then, without warning, the creature lunged forward, moving faster than anything Lena had ever seen. But before Lena could even react, the wolf was there. With a force that surprised her, the wolf collided with the creature, knocking it back into the shadows with a snarl. The two were locked in a brutal struggle, the wolf's claws and teeth flashing as it fought with the unknown creature. Lena stood frozen, unsure of what to do. her body trembling with fear and confusion. The creature hissed as it slashed at the wolf with long, sharp claws, but the wolf retaliated with ferocity, biting down hard on the creature's arm and throwing it away from him. For a few moments, the forest was filled with the sounds of the two beings fighting: snarls, growls, the cracking of branches, the swish of claws cutting through the air. Lena couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had no idea who or what the creature was, but it was clear that it meant her harm. And the wolf, this creature of the wild, was her only protector. Lena's thoughts raced. Should she run? Should she hide? But her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear, too frightened to leave the wolf's side. She had to do something. But what? The battle between the wolf and the creature was intense. But it was clear that the wolf was struggling. The creature was unlike anything Lena had ever seen. It was too fast, too strong, and it seemed to have no fear. The wolf was brave, but even he could be overpowered. The creature hissed again, slashing at the wolf's side, drawing blood. The wolf yelped in pain but refused to back down. He fought with everything he had, but the creature's relentless attacks were wearing him down. Lena's heart sank as she saw the wolf falter, his movements becoming slower, weaker. But just as the creature lunged for another strike, the wolf did something Lena hadn't expected. With a final burst of strength, he leapt forward, sinking his teeth into the creature's neck. The creature screeched in agony, but the wolf held on, refusing to let go. With a final, powerful twist, the wolf snapped its neck. The creature fell to the ground with a sickening thud, motionless. Lena stood in stunned silence, her body trembling from the intensity of the fight. The wolf, bloodied and exhausted, stood over the creature's lifeless body. His amber eyes met hers for a brief moment before he collapsed onto the forest floor, panting heavily. Lena's heart ached for him. He had saved her, but at what cost? She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. The wolf gave a soft whine, his body still, but his eyes were full of quiet understanding. He had protected her. And in that moment, Lena understood. She wasn't just lost in the forest. She was a part of something much bigger. The wolf had found her for a reason. Lena didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't leave him now. Lena sat in the darkness, the only sound the soft rustle of the leaves as the wind shifted between the trees. Her heart was still racing, the adrenaline from the battle with the creature pumping through her veins. But there was no relief. The air was heavy, thick with an unease she couldn't shake. Even with the creature gone, she still felt its presence. Something lingering in the forest, something waiting. She glanced at the wolf, who lay silently beside her. His breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes closed, his body bruised and bloodied from the fight. Lena ran a trembling hand over his fur, her fingers brushing against the dried blood that stained his coat. The wolf's amber eyes opened slightly, locking with hers. His gaze was steady, almost like a promise. He was still with her, and he wouldn't leave her. But something in Lena's gut twisted. There was an unease that gnawed at her insides, a feeling that the forest itself had changed, that they weren't alone. She couldn't explain it, but the air felt wrong, as if the shadows were deeper and the night colder. The creature was gone, but what about the others? The forest had its secrets, and Lena had a growing suspicion that they weren't all revealed yet. A snap of a twig echoed through the silence. Lena froze. Her hand instinctively moved to the wolf's side, as though seeking comfort from the creature that had just saved her life. The wolf's ears twitched, and for a moment, they sat there in the silence, listening. Lena's heartbeat thudded in her chest, each second feeling like an eternity. The snap of the twig wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Someone or something was out there watching. The hairs on the back of Lena's neck stood up, the sensation of being followed creeping up her spine. She swallowed hard, her breath shaky. She couldn't just sit there and wait. She needed to do something. But what? What if it was another creature, another force from the depths of this cursed forest? What if it was something even worse than what she had already faced? Lena, a voice whispered, but it wasn't the wolf. It wasn't even a human voice. The sound was more like a faint rustle, the breath of something unseen in the darkness. Her blood ran cold. She had heard stories, tales from her grandmother, that the forest could play tricks on your mind, make you hear things that weren't there. But this voice felt real. It felt like it had come from behind her, from the very shadows that clung to the edges of the clearing. Lena turned quickly, her heart hammering in her chest. There was nothing, only the darkness and the trees, their skeletal branches reaching out like twisted fingers. Her breath quickened, her eyes darting back and forth, searching for something, anything, to give her a sense of control. A low growl interrupted the silence. The wolf's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. The growl wasn't coming from him, though. This was different. This was the growl of something larger, something more menacing. The wolf's ears flattened against his skull as he rose to his feet. His body tense, prepared for whatever was coming. His gaze never left the darkness surrounding them. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever was out there, the wolf was ready for it, but she wasn't. The air seemed to shift around her, the quiet moments stretching longer and longer, each second amplifying her fear. Another growl, deeper this time, came from behind her. Lena whipped around, her pulse racing. The forest felt suffocating now, like the trees were closing in around them, the shadows thickening. The sense of something watching her, the sensation of eyes on her back, was overwhelming. She could hear her breath, the frantic rhythm of her heart, but it all felt muted, as if the world was closing in, pressing down on her chest. The wolf growled again, his low, warning sound filling the air. He took a step forward, ears still pinned back, teeth bared. Lena felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to stand, refusing to show weakness. If the wolf was going to face whatever was out there, she would be by his side. Suddenly, something moved in the darkness. The trees parted, and out of the shadows emerged a figure. A tall, pale form, its face obscured by the darkness of the forest. The figure was almost ethereal, its presence unnerving, like it belonged to a different world. It wasn't human, not completely. The figure moved with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying, a movement that made Lena's skin crawl. The wolf stepped forward, his growl intensifying. The figure didn't seem to react at first. It simply stood there, its head tilted slightly as if studying them both. Then it spoke. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was deep, otherworldly, cold. Lena's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a forest creature. This was something far darker, something ancient. Lena's mind raced. Who was this? What did it want? Why had it spoken to her? Was it connected to the creature the wolf had killed? Was this the real threat? The figure took a step closer, and Lena's stomach turned. She felt the weight of its gaze, a stare that penetrated her very soul. The wolf was still in front of her, his body tense, ready to strike. But Lena could feel the uncertainty in the air, like a storm was building. Something big was about to happen. The figure didn't say anything more. It simply reached out with long, slender fingers, pointing directly at Lena. In that moment, Lena felt something shift in the forest. A deep, rumbling force, like the ground beneath her feet had been disturbed. The trees groaned, the wind picked up, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Lena's breath became visible in the frigid air. But it wasn't just the cold that made her shiver. It was the sense of inevitability, the feeling that the forest had already claimed her, that she was no longer just lost in it, but part of it. The wolf barked sharply, breaking the tension, but it was no use. The figure's eyes burned through the shadows, locking onto Lena with a knowing look. She took a hesitant step back, trying to process everything that was happening. The figure's mouth parted, revealing a smile that didn't belong to anything human. "You shouldn't have come here," it said softly, the words echoing around them like a distant memory, like a warning. The wind howled louder now, the trees creaking and moaning in protest. Lena felt as though the world was closing in on her, the walls of the forest pressing against her, suffocating her. There was no way out. The only thing left was the wolf, her protector, and the unsettling figure before her. The sense of doom that hung in the air was suffocating, and Lena realized that everything she had feared about this forest, about the creatures that lived in it, was real. The forest didn't just hold its secrets, it guarded them. And whatever it wasn't going to let her go. Lena felt her heart race as she backed away, desperately searching for an escape. But the darkness seemed to swallow all hope. The wolf growled again, stepping between her and the figure, his body low, ready for the next battle. Lena held her breath, waiting for whatever would come next. The figure didn't move, and for the first time in the night, Lena realized she wasn't just running from the forest. She was running from something far worse. The figure remained motionless, its eerie smile frozen in the darkness like a warning carved into the night. Lena's pulse thudded in her ears as she stood there, paralyzed by the suffocating weight of the forest. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far away as possible from this ancient presence. But she couldn't move. The wolf, her only ally in this twisted nightmare, stood firm, his body low, fur bristling with tension. His growl cut through the silence like a sharp blade, but even he seemed to sense the magnitude of the threat before them. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure repeated, its voice laced with a haunting finality. The words wrapped around Lena like chains, tightening with each syllable. Lena's heart raced as she realized the full scope of their situation. The forest wasn't just an unforgiving wilderness. It was alive with a malevolent force, a guardian that didn't want to let go of its secrets. And now she was part of it. Her quest to find answers, to uncover the truth of the forest's curse, had led her to this moment of reckoning. There was no turning back. The wind howled once more, whipping through the trees, as though urging them to face the inevitable. Lena's breath fogged in the bitter cold, and her mind raced. She knew what she had to do. She had no choice but to fight back. The wolf shifted, his amber eyes meeting hers, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something in them. An understanding, a silent message that transcended words. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was warning her. The time had come to face whatever this dark force was head-on. Without thinking, Lena took a deep breath and pulled the knife from her belt, her fingers slick with cold sweat. The blade glinted faintly in the moonlight, but it felt insignificant in the face of such an ancient power. She wasn't a warrior. She was a girl who had found herself lost in the depths of a cursed forest. And yet, in this moment, she had to be more than that. "You want to fight me?" The figure's voice broke the silence once more, but now there was a new edge to it, an amused, almost cruel tone. "You think you can defeat me, child?" The words stung, but Lena's resolve only strengthened. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the truth, for the chance to escape the forest's grasp. She could feel the pulse of fear thrumming through her chest, but she refused to let it control her. She wasn't alone. The wolf was by her side. The figure moved then, its shadow shifting unnaturally as it advanced. It wasn't just a shape. Its form twisted, as though the darkness itself was feeding it, molding it into something otherworldly. A low, guttural laugh rumbled from the figure's chest, its smile widening. Lena raised her knife, her grip tightening around the hilt. She could see the danger now. She had no illusions about what she was facing. It wasn't just an entity or a creature. It was a force of nature itself, a manifestation of the forest's deepest secrets and its unyielding power. The wolf barked sharply, a command, and in that instant he charged. His movements were fluid, precise, his muscles coiling with raw power. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she watched him close the distance between them and the figure. His teeth bared, his speed almost supernatural. He lunged, a blur of fury and strength, but the figure merely raised a hand, almost lazily, and the wolf slammed into an invisible barrier, the force of the impact sending him sprawling to the ground. Lena gasped, her heart sinking. The wolf wasn't just fighting the figure, he was fighting something far more powerful. Something that controlled the very fabric of the forest. It wasn't a battle of strength. It was a battle of wills, and Lena could feel herself teetering on the edge of despair. But then, something inside her snapped. She couldn't back down now. She couldn't let the forest take them both. With renewed determination, Lena moved forward, her legs shaking, but her resolve unyielding. The figure had underestimated her. It had underestimated the strength of the bond between her and the wolf. She wasn't just a lost child in the woods anymore. She had come to this place for a reason, and she wasn't about to let it consume her. Lena raised the knife once more, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the figure. The forest seemed to hold its breath as she charged forward, the sound of her footsteps the only thing she could hear. The figure turned its gaze toward her, the smile still there, but now it was tinged with something else, something almost curious. "You really think you can defeat me?" it asked again, this time with a hint of surprise. Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had come too far to let fear stop her now. She was no longer just a victim of the forest. She was its challenger. With a cry that echoed through the trees, Lena launched herself at the figure, her knife aimed at the center of its chest. But just before she made contact, something shifted in the air. The wind picked up, howling with such force that it felt like the very earth beneath her was trembling. The figure's face contorted in anger, its form rippling as though reality itself was bending around it. The wolf, seeing Lena's resolve, regained his footing. He was on his paws now, ready to attack once more. He charged at the figure, his growl resonating through the clearing, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the forest. The figure raised its hand to strike the wolf down, but Lena was faster. In one swift motion, she drove the knife into the figure's chest. The world seemed to hold its breath as Lena stood frozen, her hand still gripping the knife. The figure's body rippled and distorted, its dark form shuddering, as though it were made of shadow and fear itself. And then, with a final guttural scream, the figure dissolved, its essence scattering like smoke on the wind. Lena fell to her knees, her breath ragged as she looked at the place where the figure had been. The forest seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting from her shoulders. The wolf stood by her side, his amber eyes calm but watchful. They had won. But there was no celebration, no moment of triumph. The air was still thick with the remnants of the battle, the scent of blood and magic lingering in the night. Lena could feel it, the forest was not done with them yet. But for the first time since she had entered, she felt a sliver of hope. The curse was broken, the balance restored, but the forest had changed her. She wasn't the same girl who had wandered into these woods, lost and searching. She had faced her fears, and she had survived. As Lena stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes, she looked at the wolf, her protector, her guide. He had been her strength when she had none. And though they had won, Lena knew their journey was far from over. The forest had a way of testing those who entered its domain, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready. The wolf turned and trotted into the shadows, his tail swishing behind him. Lena followed, her steps steady now, her heart light for the first time in days. They had conquered the forest's darkest secrets, and now, together, they would leave. But even as they walked away, Lena could feel the forest's eyes on her, watching, waiting. She was no longer a stranger here, but that didn't mean she had earned the forest's forgiveness. Lena stood at the edge of the forest, the towering trees stretching before her like an ancient wall, but no longer did they feel like a barrier. They had been her prison, her fear, her enemy. But now they were something else. She had walked through their darkness, faced its horrors, and emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger. The night was quiet now, as if the forest itself had exhaled a long, collective sigh of relief. The wolf, ever her silent companion, walked beside her, his steady steps a reminder of the bond they had forged through fire. She looked back at the forest, the place that had once felt so vast and threatening. It was still filled with mystery, still alive with ancient power. But now, Lena knew that fear was only part of it. The forest held secrets, yes, but it also held strength. Tested her, pushed her to her limits, and in doing so, it revealed who she truly was. She had started this journey as a lost child, but she had ended it as something more, something born of both the terror and the triumph she had faced. In the quiet aftermath, Lena's thoughts turned inward. What had she really learned from this experience? That fear could be an ally, not just an enemy. That strength wasn't always about physical power, but the resilience of the spirit. And most of all, that we are never as alone as we think we are. The wolf had been with her, guiding and protecting her. But more than that, he had been a reflection of her own courage, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, we carry the light within ourselves. Lena could have given in to the forest's darkness, let it consume her. She could have run away, letting the fear swallow her whole. But she didn't. She fought, and in that fight, she found something precious, the truth of her own strength. But as they walked away, a lingering thought clouded her mind. Was the forest truly done with her? Had it really released its grip? Or was it just biding its time, waiting for her to return, to test her once more? The questions hung in the air, unanswered. The wolf's eyes flicked to her, as if sensing the same unease, but he didn't stop. He knew better than anyone that life was full of unanswered questions. And sometimes, the only way forward was to embrace the uncertainty. Lena smiled softly, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. The forest had changed her, yes, but she had also changed the forest. There was power in knowing that we are not bound by the past, that we can rise from even the darkest places, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And as they walked into the fading light of dawn, Lena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. She was no longer just a lost girl. She was a survivor, a warrior, and above all, a force to be reckoned with. The forest had shaped her, but it could no longer control her. The journey had ended, but in many ways, it was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling adventures. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the wolf was truly protecting Lena, or was something else at play? Share your predictions and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our next mystery-filled video. Join our community of mystery lovers and stay tuned for more shocking twists and unforgettable moments. Thanks for watching, and remember, there's always more lurking just beyond the next turn.